ただいま
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to start Innovative City Forum. Innovative City Forum is an international conference held under the theme of designing the future for global cities and lifestyle, cutting-edge technologies, art and creative, urban development, economy and industry. Experts from in and outside of Japan who are involved in these areas have come together to engage in discussions, information exchange. On behalf of the organizer, let me invite the chairman for Institute for Urban Strategies at the Mori Memorial Foundation and director of Academy Hills, Mr. Heizo Takenaka. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heizo Takenaka of the Mori Memorial Foundation and Academy Hills director. We are holding this forum under the pandemic. From last week to this week, various breakout sessions have been held for discussions. And from 1 o'clock to 6:45 this afternoon, we will be having the ultimate session for this forum. We will be summarizing the discussions held so far and talk about the future going forward. Innovative City Forum began, and at that time we were considering the functions and roles of cities. The place for innovation is one solution. We are increasingly focused on knowledge-intensive society, so innovation is extremely important. According to Shunpenta, it is a new combination, and it requires various people, a diversity of people as well as diversity of companies, and Academy Hills is very important in that regard for providing such a place, and to imagine a new lifestyle, to communicate to the world. That is the reason why there is attractiveness and innovation can be brought about. We wanted to start a discourse on the innovative city. That was the objective of the Innovative City Forum. On the 15th of January, the first case for COVID-19 occurred in Japan, and very quickly. And as we are at the end of November, it has been a very challenging year. And it is still ongoing. And against this backdrop, the way we have been holding this forum this year is different. We are this is a virtual attempt that is being made. So the way we will be conducting the forum will be subject to innovation as well. And today is the wrap-up session for the forum. And now, at this juncture, we would like to survey what is your response to the current situation. On a real-time basis, I'm going to conduct a survey. So, can you explain how this is going to take place? Now, on your screen, on the right-hand side, the slide door, a chat tool is shown. From using the slide door, please respond to the questions that will be posed by Dr. Takenaka. On the right-hand side, please refer to the slider function. Takenaka-san, please. So the first one is a test. Do you believe that with the ongoing development of technology, big data will have a decisive influence over the direction of the economic and social life? The response, I agree, is the first one. The second one is it will. And the third response is I agree strongly. I do not think that big data will be as influential as some say it will. So the choices are I agree strongly, agree, or do not think that it is influential. There are still people who are voting now. So it seems to be changing on a real-time basis. so you can feel that your vote is having an impact on the overall results. Are we going to set a cut-off point? It seems to continue. So let's look at the answer. Agree strongly in the middle is 33%. So 1/3 said, I agree strongly. I agree, in more moderate cases, around 40%. And 29% responded that it will not be as influential as expected. Last year, when we had the Innovative City Forum, we posed the same question. And so we have, I agree strongly, 30%, but last year was 46%. So it seems that the recognition regarding technology impact has gone down over the year. So we have a different population answering to the question, but I believe that this will give good reference. I do not think that big data will be as influential. Last year was 24%, this year is 27%. So there is no significant change here. This is a good reference point for future discussions. So I believe that so it seems that I agree strongly has shifted somewhat to I agree. Now, let's go to the questions for this year. When do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will end? Prime Minister Suga as well as even Nishimura, Minister, do not even know the answer. It's only God that will know the answer. Now, the first one, it will end by October 2021. The second, it will end by March 2022. It will take longer. At the very end, it will end by March 2021. So please look at the responses and vote your response. March 2021 had the least response. Less than 10% or even 6% think that will end by March 2021. And it will end by October 2021. This is most prevalent at 36%. And it will end by October 2021. This was also quite prevalent, around 1/3. And 20% responded that it will take longer than that. On a real-time basis, the responses are changing. But I think the prevailing view is that it will take a long time. We must respond to life with the corona. Patience will be required. But having said that, about 40% have responded that it will end by March 2022. We have one more question. Do you think our society is going to be changed before and after the COVID-19 pandemic? It won't be changed very much. It will be changed for the better. It will be changed for the worse. So if it's you can say it won't change if you believe there are both better aspects and worse aspects. So overwhelmingly, people have responded that there will be change for the better. Not so much change, around 10% to 15%. And overwhelmingly, people have responded that there will be change for the better. I'm so happy that we have an optimistic response to the last question. And I hope that we can discuss further on these topics in the afternoon sessions. Thank you very much for your cooperation in this survey. Now, facing this pandemic, humankind has been battling this over years. And with the emergence of vaccines, cholera was found 140 years ago at the Meiji Restoration. But we have, over the years, tried to battle together. But before and after the pandemic, there is significant difference for society. This is a lesson learned from the past. What I feel the most today is that the society, as well as companies and individuals' strengths and weaknesses, have brought to the fore. Have been brought to the fore by the pandemic. Compared to Western countries, so far, the number of cases as well as mortality rate is lower. Because we have the custom of wearing masks, we are washing hands as a culture. So these beneficial aspects have had an impact. I had an opportunity to discuss with Governor Koike, and she showed me a very interesting poster. In 1918, and the Spain flu occurred. It was a poster from that time. It was a drawing, and everyone was wearing a mask. And it has been encouraged that people wear masks. So we have been doing that from 1918. I was very much impressed. But the weaknesses have also come to the fore. For example, in these challenging circumstances, there have been lockdowns of cities implemented. We cannot do this in Japan because to compel such a measure is not possible under the legal framework of Japan. Even the Prime Minister cannot do this. It has to be a request. And by requesting such measures, it is not an order, so it is very difficult to provide guarantees. So only limited funding can be provided for cooperation. But we have to keep the economy running. We have to improve the economy. Otherwise, we will have other sacrifices. After the bubble economy has burst, the global economy was in doldrums. Having entered the 1990s, the suicides have increased by 10,000 in Japan. With the deteriorating economy, 10,000 suicides will be occurring anew. That is the reason why we have to have both safety as well as the economy running. And before and after the pandemic, completely different society will emerge. This history has taught us this lesson. And against this backdrop, how will our society change? With the pandemic and innovative city, we have been discussing in 3 sessions. This time, arts and science. This session will follow after my presentation. Nanjo-san, the former director of the Moriya Museum, will be moderating, and then we will be discussing the urban strategy. We are talking about the innovative city, and city is a very important theme for us. We will have Ichikawa-san, who is a specialist in this area, to moderate the session. And from several years ago, we have been conducting the brainstorming session as well. We are trying to stimulate each other's brain. So we will be holding this. We have started this from several years ago. With the occurrence of the pandemic, whether our behavior will change has been discussed in terms of communication as well as values and the handling of data. In these 3 areas, we have conducted brainstorming. Hawada-san, Fujisawa-san, and Miyata-san, wonderful moderators, have led the discussion. We will be holding a session on this topic as well. So we will have these 3 discussions, and discussions have been taking place on these 3 topics. We will have a wrap-up in the afternoon session, and ultimately, in the last session, we will have Dr. Marcus Gabriel of University of Bonn appearing. And Nanjo-san will be moderating the final session. We will discuss with all the moderators of the sessions for in-depth discussion. At any rate, we are holding the Innovative City Forum under the pandemic in a different way. I hope that this concluding session will be useful for all of you. We look forward to your participation. So Nanjo-san will appear and the next session will begin. Thank you very much.
Professor Takenaka, thank you very much. And now, we would like to move on to the Art and Science session, the pandemic and the expansion of human perception, world brought about by the fusion of the real with the virtual. On the right-hand side of the screen that you are looking at, there is a chat tool called Slido. We welcome your questions or comments at any time using the Slido function. Let me ask the panelists to come up on the stage. Professor, Art and Media course in the Department of Information Design. Director for Art Archive Center, Tama Art University, Mr. Akihiro Kubota. And Director, Future of Humanity Research Center, Institute of Innovative Research, Tokyo Institute of Technology, Ms. Asa Ito. And Architect, Professor of Architecture, Kokushikan University, Professor George Kunihiro. And the moderator of the session is Senior Advisor, Mori Art Museum, Mr. Fumio Nanjo. Mr. Nanjo, please take the floor. ICF 2020, thank you very much for joining us. This year, ICF been focusing on COVID-19, which has struck the whole world. We cannot continue any discussion without talking about the elephant in the room, so to speak, COVID-19. So we are focusing on pandemic and art and science. And as was mentioned by Mr. Takenaka, we have urban strategy session and brainstorming session. And the other is art and science session. And I am responsible for overseeing art and science session. And this session has split into 3 themes: understand the reality, emphasize, and create with collaboration with others. This is about understanding, about emphasizing with others, and also collaborating with others. So the background of why we've put up with these themes is because a lot of things have changed as a result of COVID-19. How should we understand the change in the society? An analytical approach to COVID-19 and the impact on the society. And when we talk about this understanding of the reality, science and technology has evolved so much that enabled us to see things that we were unable to see in the past, and the reality might be emerging out of the blue, and also the change in perception point of view is also very important. The world seen from the animal's eyes, how does it look like? We have a lot of questions on understanding the reality, and also in terms of understanding one another, empathizing with one another is very important when things are diversifying, and what kind of new sets of rules could we think about? Those are some things that we can be thinking about. And in terms of collaborating with others, lifestyle could change as a result of COVID-19. And how is it going to change? Those are some questions that arise. And each of these themes has been held for 2-day sessions. And the moderators had been attending these sessions. And today, I would like to ask the moderators of these sessions to report back as to what kind of discussions took place in their sessions. COVID-19 or after COVID-19, in post-COVID or with COVID, we have those expressions. When we say with COVID, there seems to be certain countries in which that doesn't communicate very well because COVID seems to be something that need to counter with. It's not something that we coexist with, but in Japan we tend to think of coexisting with nature. So thinking of COVID as something that we need to live with going forward might be quite unique to Japan. So with these 3 sessions, how much was this being elaborated? It's kind of difficult to say because there wasn't much of a specific vision that was shared across these 3 sessions, but I think it's fair to say that we were able to come up with new keywords and new ways of looking at reality, looking at the world, I think also has been proposed. And I think we were able to see quite a diverse perception. And you have developed the discussions to engage in what kind of views we have in the post-COVID-19 world. And as we saw in the poll earlier, many people seems to have positive impression of the post-COVID-19 world, and that was quite impressive. So if we could each one of you report to the audience as to what kind of discussion we had, starting with Kubota-san, please.
This is Kubota. Good afternoon, everybody. So, I would like to share with you what we discussed on the 2 days, 16th and 17th of November. So, the larger theme, as introduced by Mr. Nanjo, was pandemic. If pandemic triggers an expansion of our perception, what will be the new world that we will be living in? I think this is the theme that we discussed as part of the art and science session. So the 16th and 17th, this was really the opening of the forum. So I discussed with the staff on where we should start. So within the art and science discussion, we talked about the pandemic and perception, as was mentioned by Nanjo-san, and then reality as well. So how can we understand these aspects? For example, this forum today, including myself, everybody is participating because we want to know, we want to understand something new. I think this is the basic motivation for participating in the forum. But wanting to know, wanting to understand, what is that mechanism? We actually started by breaking down that mechanism. So, the first day, new conditions for understanding the world, understanding reality. How do we understand understanding? This was the starting point. So, in this pandemic or in this world with SNS, it is very difficult for us to understand each other. We are seeing this separation, segregation all over the world. So once again, is it really possible for us to understand one another? This is something that I have been thinking about all the time. And these were the speakers, Professor Oki, Assistant Professor Hoshino, and Mr. James Bridle. And we had a lot of discussions. And the keyword that I had in my mind was, first of all, from Oki-san. She mentioned that if you talk about perception and understanding, how is it different between lay people and experts? For example, the questionnaire we had earlier, that is basically a questionnaire for lay people or citizens. But whether we call these people amateurs or citizens, it could be very different. And in the pandemic, the view of the expert is not necessarily believed by the citizens or by the general public. So once again, what is the difference between the understanding of experts and understanding of lay people? And then once you understand, you describe it using language. And Internet is actually a vast sphere of language. And there has been a lot of evolution within the language. However, what happens to our physicality, our body itself? And then finally, there is a technology that is supporting these developments. So these were the topics that were discussed. So I mentioned the difference between lay people and experts, and then Hoshino-san talked about concentration and distraction. And Mr. James Bridle talked about computation and predictions. These were the keywords that came out from the three panelists. What we see today is that part of the population does not accept the views of the experts. So how should we understand and think about COVID-19? Experts want to be precise in their wording and want to proceed in an accurate manner. On the other hand, people want to understand using their emotions and values, and the gap between experts and lay people have become wider and wider. And this is not just due to COVID, but for example, the many topics discussed in expert committees are not well understood by the public, but they became more prevalent during COVID. And there is also a danger in making things easy to understand. In today's discussion, something that's simple and easy to understand could be a conspiracy theory. So how do we maintain something that's actually difficult to understand? That is perhaps a new sense of literacy. Perhaps the moment that we think we understand, that's the most dangerous point. So in order to generate that understanding, Mr. Hoshino talked about concentration and distraction. And he cited this statement from Claire Bishop. So we now think that concentration is good, and being distracted is relatively not so good, unnecessary. But actually, the society may be turning into a place where it is difficult to concentrate. Or, for example, you are talking to somebody else, but you are also looking at your smartphone. Or you could be taking a class, but you could also be doing something else on your phone. But actually, under neoliberalism, the ideal subject is a computer. And maybe this reflects the age that we are living in. And Mr. James Bridle, his authorship, New Dark Age, is talking about computation. Whether it's AI, we are using computers, and we are consuming huge amount of energy in that process. This is a picture of a data center. The more you computate, the more the environment is distracted. And so how super optimistic it is to think that more computation, we reach an age of singularity. We're just looking at one aspect of the issue. And by humanity believing too much in technology, this is actually a driver who fell into a river because he believed in GPS. The more we believe in technology, the more we become blind to everything else. That is another danger. And these conflict between people, or these gaps that separate people, have arose based on these developments. So the second day, we talked about living in the world of plural understanding. Rather than seeking one understanding in anthropology, we talked about plural understanding. Having not one, but multiple understanding of the world. And these were the panelists. We have Turkish artist group Ouch, and Mr. Yoichiro Miyake, who is a games developer, and Ms. Aiko Hibino talked about prediction and forecast. And as James Bridle mentioned, computational thinking is directly linked to AI. And in the Future and Art exhibition at the Mori Museum, there was technology linking to art. And so Ouch introduced that topic. And then Miyake-san talked about the background to that. And actually, the intelligence and the prediction is deeply linked, and how that is accepted by society. That was the third topic that we discussed. Actually, Ouch also participated in this world's biggest AI exhibition in Paris using AI in the exhibition. This is in Nanjing. This is public art using NASA's Kepler's satellite data. It's a very large-scale public art project. So in a positive sense, we talked about overcoming the wall between experts and amateurs, but this may be one approach to that. And how the world of physics connects to people's awareness. This is at the background of AI and intelligence discussion. And we want to be free from the environment. At the same time, we want to be a part of the environment. And within this continuum, how do we create intelligence and awareness? That was what Miyake-san talked about. And this is from Jeff Hawkins. He designed Palm. And his book is called On Intelligence. People's intelligence is actually based on predictions. So we unconsciously act and move around using predictions. And this predictive ability has been expanding. For example, if you step here, you might fall, so you place your foot elsewhere. And then what will happen tomorrow? And it will happen in 10 years or 100 years. So we continue to expand that prediction. And going back to Oki-san's comment earlier, the prediction of the pandemic has raised a lot of expectations as well as a lot of criticism. So, for example, when an expert said that 400,000 people may die, the fact that this didn't happen, there was a lot of criticism. However, this prediction was not for the sake of making this come true. This is Merton's explanation about the nature of prophecy. There are actually two types of prophecy: self-fulfilling prophecy and self-destroying prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a lie becoming the truth. For example, when a bank is established and when somebody says that the bank may go into bankruptcy, even though the bank itself did not have any financial issues, because everybody talked about it, the bank goes bankrupt. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And also for COVID, saying that people may die, and be careful, and as a result, less people die. So, of course, scientific prophecy, for example, a comet getting near the Earth, that is another type of prophecy. But what we're talking about here is a prophecy about human and society. And so we need to have a better understanding of what it is to make a prophecy or prediction. So this is my last slide. In Hibino-san's presentation, these were the points that were raised. In the post-COVID world, how will the future prediction technology be positioned? So what we saw earlier in the questionnaire, those were expectations or people who felt like giving up. These were not predictions by the experts, but how people simply thought about it. But going forward, how should we share the future prediction in the society? Hibino-san proposed these are three scenarios. One is a world where indices and analytical methods are continuously updated and reflected in behavior, and this leads to a pluralistic world or pluralistic understanding. The second scenario is future prediction technology is developed, but no one believes in it. And self-destruction prophecy doesn't occur in the first place. And the third scenario, a world where multiple futures and unattainable possibilities are increasingly multiplied and visualized. So I hope that we can hear from many people on their views today about the scenario and what will happen, what's going to be our future. We have been discussing this over the past few days, but perhaps we should take another look at what we really think about the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You were able to connect the most difficult points to connect. Ito Asa-san will be appearing next. Can you hear us? Please start. I would like to share my slides. So Kuwata-san, can you release yours? Can you see my slides? So I have been able to lead the discussion on the empathy for others over 2 days. So when we say empathy for others, conventionally we will be discussing empathy amongst human beings. But with the advent of COVID-19, when we talk about empathy for others, the others scope has expanded. So we are including non-humans in the others as well. Because when we talk about non-humans, I would also like to point out that when the pandemic occurred, the global leaders said that they have war against the virus. So this perception is very important because the leaders have been discussing the virus in the context of war. It means that it will have a significant impact on our lives thereafter because human beings are not just fighting with the virus, it has also brought about division amongst people. For example, the Oriental people like us living overseas were seen as the cause of the COVID-19 riots have occurred as part of this phenomenon. So the engagement with virus will also have an important impact on how human beings interact as well. So let's look at the viewpoint of the biologists. This is very famous in Japan. Shinichi Fukuoka, biologist, said that on the 6th of April, he has written this article. Virus is not the enemy, according to him, and it has altruism, and it has a very important role to play in the evolution of human beings. Specifically, the DNA will be transmitted horizontally by the virus. We have transmission of the genes vertically as well, but even amongst the species, DNA can be exchanged, and the virus is transporting this DNA to other species. For higher organisms, it seems that the viruses have run away temporarily and then come back. So they are not the enemy, it is a part of us, a part of human beings. And that is what we have to bear in mind when we talk about empathy. The individuals must be self or must be redefined. On the 19th of November session, we talked about the symbiosis of human and non-humans. The first speaker was Mr. Junji Watanabe. He is a specialist on haptics. And through haptics, he talked about various aspects. Using haptics, for example, as Junji-san is holding now, it's called Heart Picnic. It's his work that enables if you place this on your heart, then it will make the box vibrate. So your heartbeat can be transmitted to the box, and people can feel that. It is not just understanding each other through words. It is a more haptic self-introduction that can be made beyond words. This kind of relationship is not based on linguistics. Therefore, we can go beyond our assumptions and become more intimate. Watanabe-san has said that the body is the closest other, and going beyond the boundary will allow you to have relationship with the other. Another key word was self as we. So in terms of tools that we use, as well as the environment that we use, inclusive of everything is a self. That is the meaning of self as we. And Miss Caroline Jones of MIT was the second speaker on this day. She is a specialist in modern art. But what she gave as her presentation was in the area of biology. So she talked about Leibniz as well as Kumagusu Minakata. Their worldview were shared. And she also talked about the smell, the importance of the smell for the human being. Through the aroma that we recognize is based on the fungi that lives within our bodies. And when the weather goes bad and when it rains, there is a special smell. This is the result of the fungi that exist in the soil, and the intersection thereof is allowing us to smell. And the cells that enable this process is from very small existence in the cell. Magus co-evolution was shared. There is a long history which is embedded in our body that continues to live. And her conclusion was that to become one, you must be many. The history of the living organisms is what we base our lives upon. Now, third speaker was Dr. Keiko Nakamura. She is a specialist on biohistory. So her existence per se was overwhelming for us, and I would not be able to communicate or do justice to talk about what she has shared. So she is looking at the world beyond the perspective of the human beings, and therefore her sessions have been truly overwhelming. We should not just consider human beings as a part of living organism, and the design and implementation is the basis of science and technology. However, life is more bricolage and tape and more ephemeral. And in the after session, she said that when we consider about life, what is most important is that there are contradictions within life. We are living, but my cells have been turning over. It already has death. So there is death within the concept of life. And in the absence of that, that will be the death of the living organism. So in terms of empathy with others, we have to also take into consideration this contradiction and not just consider this in a straight line. Now, second date was 23rd of November. We discussed technology and human relationships. In this session, we discussed human scale issues. And, for example, diversity of individuals, how society should be formed, was discussed. The first speaker was Dr. Kenichiro Mogi, a brain scientist. She focused on the pursuit of happiness. This is not something that can be defined on a top-down basis. Everyone should have the right to pursue happiness. So how can this happiness be defined? We have to consider the fact that the bodies are different from person to person. McLuhan's word that he referenced to was human is the message. The difference in the body is very important according to his view. The second speaker was Dr. Mara Mills of New York University. At New York University, she is at the Disability Studies Center. She is the director of this organization. And under COVID-19, the lives of the disabled people were archived. And specific examples of these chronicles were shared. What was impressive for me was the story of Fabio. Now, he had developmental problems, and he has autism. And before the pandemic, in order to earn his living, he was working at a coffee shop. It was only for his life. It was labor for pursuing life. But with the pandemic, the coffee shop was closed, and he was able to receive a benefit to sustain his living. And ironically, because he was able to receive these benefits, he was able to pursue happiness for his own for the first time. Prior to that, he was only working for his life, to sustain his life. But he was able to find other pursuits, such as going to the movies or reading a book, pursuing happiness for his own. And that was a very interesting and compelling story. And Dr. Mills also said that for disabilities, in the state of pandemics, they are more knowledgeable. Disabled people are more knowledgeable because they have already been facing obstacles in life under normal times. For example, not being able to go out is a privilege for normal people, but disabled people, this was always a challenge, even before the pandemic. Because there is disability, it has offered the opportunity for able people and disabled people to share knowledge. The last speaker was Dr. Inatani. He is a legal specialist. Legal framework and laws are assuming or are premised on the white man in the Western world. But with the advancement of technology, and as there is increasing importance placed on diversity, the Western modern subject-based laws are no longer viable. A very specific challenge was posed. So when we talk about there is a blurring of the barrier between subject and object. So we are becoming one together with the technology as seen in cyborgs. So what is the responsibility in that context? What is a crime in this context has to be reviewed fundamentally. What he has emphasized is that to be able to use technology and create the society in this experimental process, normal people, ordinary people should participate increasingly, because non-participation in the design process will lead to crime. This was the suggestion made by Dr. Inatani. Through this two-day session, as Nanjo-san has already mentioned, it isn't as if specific solutions or specific visions did not come to the fore, and in fact more questions arose than solutions. So let me discuss what are the questions posed. When we consider empathy with others, we have to understand how we are going to understand each other. It's not just words or numbers. There is a limit to understanding in this context, using our body in the scale of life. There should be empathy. This kind of understanding, new ways of empathy will become increasingly important. The last point is what I was referring to earlier. The I or self concept should also be subject to reconsideration. For example, there is a less demarcation between the subject and object, and we all embody the history of life, and there is more diversity. When we create a society against this backdrop, we have to reconsider what is happiness or what is democracy. This is also coming to the fore as a question. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, a fundamental review will be required. Same for responsibility as well as ability. We have to question these concepts, otherwise we will not be able to understand each other. We will not be able to create a new society unless we are able to find answers for these questions. With that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much.
コロナの問題
It seems as if it's not directly related to COVID-19, but how should we look at COVID-19 and how will the society address COVID-19? I think the discussions that you share with us will provide us a foundation for thinking going forward. I think we are running a bit late, so I would like to ask Kunihiro-san to briefly report to us on your sessions. Well, I served as the moderator for Art and Science breakout sessions, New Condition for Cities and Architecture, Collaborative Creativity, and Designing New Lifestyles, Collaborative Creativity. And I am George Kunihiro. On the first day of Art and Science breakout session, we had a session on new condition for cities and architecture where 3 speakers spoke. The first and the second, unlike the first and second sessions, it was more of a creators and artisans session. Architecture and project managers, the design team is of course very important, and also in the construction process many people are involved in realizing a project. The design conditions, concepts, and the thinking process has to be precisely understood. Especially the communication between the construction team and the design team will impact the success of the project. Such a level of precision is necessary. Unless there is a mutual trust-based relationship, it will not be possible. And Mr. Tane Tsuyoshi, an Japanese architect who is based in Paris, conducting and holding various projects around the world, was unwavered by the lockdown and is continuing to engage with his staff members and holding meetings with people around the world. Each project would have a potential memory, and he uses that memory as a hint in order to design his projects. And how will the memory of this pandemic will be intrinsically found in his projects in the future, and how will it impact the design process going forward? This was a question that I posed, as did Mr. Nanjo, and we were not able to receive a specific answer. And this is likely because Mr. Tane is relatively young as an architect, and therefore he is consumed by focusing on what he is facing today, and therefore he may not have the leisure of thinking about developments going forward. And the second speaker in this first session was a founding principle of DNA design and architecture, Xu Tiantian. And she talked about the damages of pandemic and outside of Japan. And she said that people in China are mindful of the impact of COVID-19 and yet conducting work on a business as usual basis. And in her community revitalization project, she reported that in the villages, the rural villages, there are no COVID-19 cases, and therefore people who come from the cities will be surprised. The impact of COVID-19 was likely not felt in such remote villages. She is basically working remotely, and she seems to be sending data and holding meetings through Zoom, which is a different application than the Zoom that we are familiar with. And the third speaker of the session was an architect, Bijoy Jain, who is engaged in projects around the world, including Japan. And he attempted a very poetic and profound interpretation using metaphorical images of how he was feeling about the pandemic. The impact of pandemic in his case was that he would have no contact with the owner of the project, and without visiting the site, he is able to think about the creative activities. And even if there could be some discrepancy in what was intended and the completed work, he said that that could be accepted as a new paradigm. And what I felt throughout this particular breakout session is that, especially since I myself is also an architect, as a creator, from a practical perspective, a concept, the design intent, and the architectural structure has to be successfully communicated to the design team and the construction team. This is a major challenge that we are facing. But in the meantime, since I am an educator and also a researcher, and I am also taking part in various research environments in a post-COVID-19 world, post-COVID-19 related projects in this time, the collaboration concept is not actively being dealt with. This is my impression. Now, the second day of the breakout session that I moderated, which was held on the 25th of November, in this session, we focused about clothing, food, and housing from each of these areas and thought about the future of new lifestyles, and we heard from the creators. The first speaker, as young as 31, he was the second Japanese to be selected as the guest designer for Paris Fashion Week, Haute Couture category, Mr. Yuima Nakazato. Memories that are embedded in clothes are to be taken. Sorry, I should have turned off the microphone of my computer. I hope this is off. Did I turn the microphone off? My apologies for that. Is my microphone off from my PC? Let me go back to where I was. Yuima Nakazato would extract the memory from clothes and feed in memory into artificial textile. This was an epoch-making attempt. And in the meantime, in the sustainable society, he is also challenging creating or designing clothes that will not be disposed of. He would receive a shirt from a customer and try to extract the feelings, memories from those shirts. And through the process of designing a new shirt for that particular customer, he was able to communicate through feelings with the customer. And this shirt, which is sort of an alter ego of the customer, will travel to the designer and travel back to the owner. And he reported that this was a new form of communication using virtual means, and that this project was quite successful. The second speaker in this session was Open Meal project food tech artist and also art director of Dentsu, Mr. Sakaki. And his presentation was about using data and digital in food. For example, by doing an elemental analysis of taste of sushi and making use of 3D printers, use the data and digital in order to freely design sushi and print it out that is edible. He is seeing progress in this research, and if this technology is completed, sushi can be teleported. For example, the fatty tuna data that is sent from Tokyo to New York could be printed out as a virtual sushi in a restaurant in New York. This could be a very typical food culture proposition in a post-COVID-19 world. This is it. And this third speaker for this session was from Miss Nadia Debs from Lebanon. She is born in Lebanon, but grew up in Japan. She's a designer, and she has experience living in Japan, the United States, and the UK. And she has experienced multicultural that led to where she is today. Especially, she was deeply impacted by the Japanese culture, and her interest in understanding of the Japanese culture is reflected in her design for interiors and furniture. And she also talked about from cultural need, sense of touch, and the manual creativity of the designer is very important from a cultural perspective. So she talked about collaboration in a post-COVID-19 world in a pursuit for the sense of touch. So these are the presenters who talked about collaboration and pandemic. And looking back on the discussions that took place in the 2 days, I feel that there is a definite need for virtual to be established, and that the difference in time, space, and distance will be overcome by providing virtual space, and that the technology is there to narrow down that difference in order to have a more accurate and precise discussion. And with that, I would like to conclude my report of the 2-day sessions. Thank you very much for that.
So how should we proceed from here? Kunihiro-san, you talked about some concrete topics about lifestyle, so maybe we should start from there. So you are an expert on architecture and how we do your work. You can make instructions via Zoom, but it will not be the exact same as when you are actually there on the site. But you still need to delegate via Zoom, which means that perspectives of other people be reflected. Well, architecture is to build something, and I'm sure that others, Kubota-san, have a similar experience. The architect never builds, actually constructs. So it is simply a tool for the builders. The construction plan is a way to convey the intent of the architect to the people who are actually building. So this has been done over thousands of years, but normally we have regular meetings on site, but the fact that this cannot be conducted means that the architect is not able to confirm the process of the construction. So this is the age that we are living in, and how do we overcome this challenge? So Zoom is like an extension of the design plan, or an extension of the meetings. So Mr. Bijoy, he said that he will accept if there is a discrepancy between his initial design and what is being built. So amongst the 6 speakers, Bijoy-san was the only one who said that we can accept it and we can make this as a new paradigm. So he gives up controlling everything and using the new communication tools like Zoom and other online systems to construct. You need to delegate to some extent. Bijoy J is working at Studio Mumbai, and he is at his own studio, and some of the engineers are there to cut the stone and so on. But he's a really hands-on person. He is the most hands-on person, but he was the first one to say that he will be able to delegate and accept the discrepancies. On the other hand, people who were not as hands-on, like Tane-san, was not as clear in setting that direction. So people who are supervising on site, their intent, their perception will probably be reflected in the end product. But the actual building that will be constructed will have multiple perspectives reflected there. But what happens when there is a discrepancy? So there's a designer, there is the constructor, and also the owner. And if the 3 have a discrepancy, there could be litigations, there could be big problems, there could be confusion. So if we take this in a positive light, to become one, you must be many. That was one of the comments that was shared today. By becoming many, you can create something as one. That's a very inclusive concept, or how we live in this age of diversity. Perhaps this will lead to realizing such a world. But authors, artists, they will have a problem. So we have to eliminate that. We should stop having architects or artists or something with the ist. We should do away with all of that, and it should be teamwork. So Ito-san, you write a book, but the author is not the only one who's contributing. There are editors and many people who are part of that process. So it is the author who may have the end responsibility, but the author, one person will not be able to really create a book. So we need to share the understanding that it is not just one person who is creating. And we've had that concept from the past, to have that kind of an open creation. And that has been, for our architecture, more than art. But I think, Ito-san, I'd like to ask you, there is a sense of ego, there is a sense of self. And you talked about eliminating that fact. Maybe we have to go to philosophy and other studies. Ito-san, any comment from your side? From those with disabilities, people without disabilities think that they are autonomous, but actually they're not at all. So I'm speaking, but I didn't create this line connecting to you. I'm not the one who built this PC. The lunch that I earlier was not created just by myself. So I'm dependent on so many people, and that is how I am able to live my daily lives. So the ego itself is actually very tiny. And it's not perhaps very relevant. And we have to clarify that going forward. Perhaps COVID pushed digitalization and online interactions. Do you think that this is connected? So what was underneath has been unveiled and clarified due to COVID. And I really feel strongly in the neoliberalistic economy, and everybody should be responsible for their own. That's something that we should really do away with. Environmental issues, we can't resolve that based on individual responsibility. It's where the society as a whole have to think about the society as a whole. It's not about I didn't emit CO2, you did. That's not going to resolve this issue. So what is ego? As Ito-san said, each and every one of us, that's actually wrong. The society will be in a complete mess if we all pursue our happiness. And the individual, each person, that's actually very risky. Because if we allow anything based on their individualistic pursuit of happiness, then that will create confusion. So what should we call that? I think we can put a name to that after we have that society. So not everything can be controlled by yourself. As Kunihiro-san said, don't seek perfection. Don't try to optimize perfectly. For example, production and consumption, I think we should eliminate that concept as well. So try to converse without using those terminology. But language is like a block. There's a definition and to these words, and then we are conversing based on these words with definitions. And we try to not use all of these blocks of language. It's difficult. So experts' role is to define clearly and use those definitions correctly. But it's not really working in the society. So everybody is interpreting on their own and commenting on their own, and that's why we see these conspiracy theories and so people trying to be themselves. This leads to these conspiracies. So you're against people living their own free lives? No, it's not. We don't have to use those terminologies, though. We should, of course, respect each individual's rights. What's very interesting to me is something that is separate from yourself. That's where we want to claim ownership. So something that we write via text, it is a separate entity from yourself, so you have to claim ownership. But if it is closer to your body, for example, or your voice that you're communicating with, rather, I think you can emphasize the collaborative nature of it. I'm really focusing on voice, actually. I really like podcasts, and it's become a very big thing. But something that's more connected to your physical body, I think it will enhance the collaborative nature. In science fiction, there was more than human. 5 to 6 people with different capabilities coming together and creating one personality. So 6 people coming together to create one personality. That was the society that was depicted. So going forward, when teamwork is the basis of society, perhaps a unique characteristic of that team and collaborating within the team, that will become very important. So maybe individualism is an illusion of modernity, an autonomous individual. That was the illusion that supported Western modernity. But Ito-san, all your people rejected that idea, and I was so that was very interesting to me. How you yourself are created by the external world. And that is the kind of the work style that Kunihiro-san, you are looking at. Yes, I think being more flexible or softer, or perhaps it's a bit more Eastern philosophy. So in Asia, the chief constructor may be the one who is building, but it was different from the Western architect sense. There is a sense of self in the architect. So I don't think we are able to reach a conclusion here today, but looking at the world before and with and after COVID, I feel that we were able to find some keywords. Self as we. That Nakayama-san's message was very powerful. Rather than a simple Western modernistic way of thinking based on individual identity, this may not be fully sufficient for the society of our future. So with that in mind, we would like to draw this session to a close. Thank you very much to the three moderators. Thank you very much.